Hey everyone, thanks for joining us.
Hello.
I'm Alex Poterek, a senior designer on XD, and
I'm Lindsey Wallace. I'm the researcher with the XD team.
yeah, and thanks again for joining us. If you were carrying over from Zach and Chris's designing live for you guys, thanks for sticking around and being with us. They did some cool things. They were building like the daily challenge with the Cash app and things like that.
Cool.
It was awesome.
Awesome.
I'm glad Zach was back, actually. He was here a couple weeks ago. I was hosting with him on that same show. Good guy from Salt Lake City.
Awesome.
But yeah, so thanks for being here with us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course.
It's my pleasure.
You were actually my first researcher on XD, so you
Yep.
know, got a special little bond going on with
That's
that.
right. We've been working together for a couple years now.
I know, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's been years.
Yeah.
It seems, yeah, it's been flying by. Today we have a really cool show. This is episode 17 of Designing Adobe XD, and we're going to talk a little bit about the user journey, essentially, like designing in that process and like having research be involved with that, and actually figuring out what kind of features you want to build and like why you want to build them and what the user expectation is. You introduced me to that for the most part when it comes to this. I mean,
Yeah.
deep down, I feel like I've always had like the thing in the back of my head, but I just never really put it to words, or to a process, I should say, like an official process. And yeah, you've been awesome in helping with that.
Thank you.
So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So we, one of the things we do in addition to actually testing things with users is at the beginning of the process, we work with the designers when somebody has an idea for a new feature. We always ask them, okay, what's the problem that this feature is solving for a user? What do you think someone is doing when they need this feature, and how are they going to use this feature to help them solve their problem? And so asking those questions right at the beginning of your design process really helps you organize your thoughts and also build more effectively. It's really important to think about what the user's kind of goal is and what that end-to-end experience looks like for the user, especially on a team where different pieces of the product can be being built by different people. It can be hard to keep track of that end-to-end experience, and you don't want things getting fragmented for the person who's actually going to be using the product. So
totally.
Yeah.
And we fall into that trap as like being designers, building this for ourselves. We fall into like, I know what we want, like all that kind of thing, but a lot of times we don't even know what we want. So we get really excited about a feature, and it really helps us to kind of step back and kind of figure out like the higher level and asking about those things. Yeah, I need somebody like that when I'm buying things on Amazon late at night, where I'm like,
What's problem does this solve for
yeah,
you,
like,
Alex?
why do I really need this croquet set? Like, what am I going to do with this?
In what situation would you be using the croquet set?
You know what? I've used it once, and it was
go.
during our team offsite, and I never used it since. or
Maybe you
before.
could have rented it.
I could have, or just returned it
Yeah.
afterwards. But yeah, so going through that journey, super important process, and I think that's what we're going to try to set up a little bit today. So, everyone in the crowd, thanks for joining.
Yeah.
Right off the bat, I kind of want to set out a little homework for you guys, or a little bit of interaction with you guys. I would love to hear about features that you guys want to see in XD that maybe aren't here or aren't in the roadmap. I see a couple things in the, they want you to sneak a couple things that maybe I wouldn't allow.
Yes.
But I don't think you can get away with that either.
Nope.
So we probably won't be able to do that.
Researchers operate under deep secrecy, so yeah.
I know,
Yeah.
right? It's kind of like a doctor, like a.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't like disclose what.
Confidentiality rules.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I would say, in addition to Alex's request for features, what would be most important, for us to really help you guys and design them effectively would be if you could tell us why you want these features and what problem they're solving for you. That would be so helpful, just as Alex gets started. So in addition to, something that would look cool, like what would be helpful about having that thing to you? Because that's really one of the most important things for Alex to know as he gets started designing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could, take a shot in the dark, but usually it's a miss, and we end up backtracking and like doing wasteful work.
Okay, so I'm seeing some hotkey suggestions.
Yeah, hotkey for eye color, definitely something I want.
Color picker hotkey.
Mm-hmm. The group selection tool, I want to hear a little bit more about that. Is that the direct selection where I can like select things between different groups, or just can you expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, and also the color picker hotkey. You know, as a researcher, I'm an anthropologist, not a designer, so I have this level of, can you explain things that seem obvious to me? Which can be actually really helpful.
Totally. Because I know from personal experience, the hotkey, there is this debate within us, like within the turtle design team, of like what that means. Because if you hit, say, the I key, which color picker are you trying to choose? Are you trying to choose the fill or the stroke? Should it toggle between the three? We've explored that a little bit, and so getting a little bit more information on what you guys would want or what you guys would actually expect is actually really helpful for us.
Yeah. Okay. Well, which one?
Also, quicker workflow. I want a little bit more information about that one too.
Yeah.
But we can hop into XD real quick if we can go to my screen. And maybe we can just start queuing up.
Was quicker workflow an explanation for what they wanted or why they wanted something, or was it a good suggestion?
Good question.
It's a little hard to tell in the chat format because I don't think we can scroll back.
Right. Hotkey for fill specifically, I guess people are looking at. Another thing we can do is go really meta and design a user flow tool inside of XD. It could get scary. It could get confusing.
I mean, that would be cool, but maybe we should do one of the things they've asked us to. What do you think?
Okay, let's go with it.
Yeah.
So do you think, well, we can't really, it's hard to design for a hotkey.
Yeah, it's hard to do that visually. How about the group selection tool?
So
is that something that you can do visually?
It can. It's a little bit less workflow oriented, which is what I was hoping to get through. So it's kind of like going through the process of all of that.
Okay.
So let's keep a couple other ideas coming. I know I saw a couple other ones in there that might have a little bit more legs to work with.
Questions about interaction. It would be so great if you could design those on the spot, like animations and stuff like that.
I would love that.
It would be amazing.
That would be incredible. I know somebody brought that up in the Chris and Zach segment before this. They're talking about, I think somebody said if we had an animation timeline, they would be an XD user for life, which, you know, that's good to hear. The gradient color picker. Oh, so like if I select something, if I select a gradient, it'll just create it'll just fill my fill with that gradient. I see. A toggle between caps and regular text. That's something we could do. Let's see what else. Lining up text.
I find that I spend a lot of time lining up text to its visual bounding box as opposed to the text box that is automatically generated. Maybe we could solve that problem for that person.
Yeah.
Is there a way we could solve that problem?
Totally.
Let's think about it.
Let's actually try to figure out what they mean by that first.
Yeah.
So when I'm in XD,
Okay.
I can put in, let's do copy text. And what I'm assuming they mean is when they're, let's say they have like an input field or something like this, and then they have let's say this is the title for it. This is actually something we run into all the time, so this is actually really funny that this is being brought up for me. When we're redlining these two things, if say this is a dropdown and this is the title for that dropdown, for us there's this kind of like internal like back and forth between designers, because we all do it a little bit differently, is whether you should redline up to the bounding box of the text, or if you should redline to the
bottom of
the baseline of it. So there's good reason for both of them. The bounding box allows for, as you can see, these descenders to be accounted for, so everything below the baseline that pops down. But in a lot of text, so say you didn't have this, this visually makes a lot more sense, because if not, you'd be adding a lot more padding.
But what about like the Y that was in the copy that hung down into your box? Doesn't that mess it up?
Well, if it's that tight of a margin, then totally. But if it's not, it's usually visually okay, because your eye kind of just goes to the baseline a lot of times. And if like you were saying, if the copy is like aligned to the text, then yeah, you have to account for that spacing, and then at the very least like this. But usually you don't have that tight of margins, and if you do, maybe either really in a constrained work environment, where you really have to fit a lot of text, or maybe you should think about adding a little bit more space regardless. But that's an interesting thing. And yet there is a workaround to actually what somebody was saying, but you can, like, and another part of it is this top part, as you can see. There's this extra space up here. So again, if I'm trying to align this text over here, do I align it like this, or do I align it to the bounding box of that text?
How do you make that decision?
You have to come to an agreement with everyone and just try to be consistent about it. But getting back to the tool, there is that workaround where you can go up to object, path, and then convert to path, and then it actually tightens it around the text.
Okay.
So the downside of that, though, is now it's not really editable text. So now it's just kind of vectors within this.
Is there a way the tool could solve that problem for you that you can think about?
Totally.
What is it?
It would be some sort of option that says, like, align to, or transform to baseline, I guess would be the text. Or,
but what about all those discussions you guys have to have on your team to, like, agree about things? How could you, how would you use the tool in that situation? Is there a way it could help?
Are you user researching me right now?
A little bit. I am. I'm researching Alex.
I caught you. I caught you in it.
It's okay. Meta.
So yeah, that's a good question. So how do you, is there a way that we can solve this where just creating alignment over how we all use these things? Yeah, so I'm trying to think of different ways you can do that. So in a style guide, maybe when you're saying like, okay, when you use text, here are the rules behind that style. So maybe it's part of your design system, part of the workflow. Maybe there's some sort of extension that you install that your team has that like will call you out when you're doing it, when you're not aligning it to the right thing. So maybe it'll just like have a little thing that pops out and says, hey, like you're doing it wrong.
What if you only had to agree on it with your team once?
That's ideally what you should have to do. Yeah. So you have. That's why I'm saying that maybe you should have this like source of truth where everyone kind of looks at it and says, okay, yeah, we all agree to this, and this is how we're going to do it.
But I mean, I feel like I'm playing the designer here. But like once you guys agree on it and you have the source of truth and stuff, is there a way that we could use XD to help you not have to manually do it that way? The way you agreed on every time?
Totally, yeah. I think there is a way. I think the way, I guess that's where I was trying to get at with the extension thing, right? Like it's just something that we all have installed. That way we all agreed on it once. Now it just, it'll default you. It'll actually create a set of defaults that your team agreed upon, right?
Okay.
So maybe it does look like this instead of like this.
What would be useful about it being an extension versus like a setting?
I guess maybe by extension I meant setting. Like something kind of that lives overall in the app. Something that I can distribute to my team and be like, hey, like if somebody new joins, like, hey, these are the settings you want to use for this. So maybe it's like some sort of like JSON file that they just open up and then it sets all your defaults for you based on the team thing. So I wonder if that's how we can approach it.
How does it work today? Like if you set that, if you kind of set it up and do the workaround, do those settings carry over in that file? Like if you were to share it with somebody else, would they have that information or no? Nope,
not today.
Oh.
We don't have settings in XD.
Oh, okay.
So
you can see that I'm not a designer.
No, I know, but
like once you've put it, yeah, okay.
So if they open this file and it's like this, it'll be constrained to the text still. It'll keep that, so they'll notice that for sure.
Okay.
So that's something we can kind of maybe brainstorm. So if your team is maybe it's bigger than just these text alignment things. Maybe it's just like a bunch of things. Like another big thing is
there's a lot of questions around text coming up here. There's things about fonts and renaming them.
What do we have?
Command Option C in InDesign. It takes excess space from a text box. toggle for the two kinds of bounding boxes. Those are good ideas.
I do want to, like, I think Linda actually is teaching somebody right now that you can, in XD, create character styles.
Yeah.
So if I have this...
yeah, Alex had a question around that. Why don't you show him that?
Cool. So if I have this text, I can go into my assets panel down in the bottom left, and then say create character style. And then from here, I can actually edit it, so I can change what the character is, or I can double click into it and actually change it. So if I want to say this is my body copy, it'll save it as body copy. And this is actually goes back to what we were talking about. So now I'm naming this and kind of setting up the rules and expectations for anyone else that opens this file. So very similar to, like, if this is, right now this is point text, maybe I want this to be paragraph text.
That's cool.
So that's a good way to do it.
So does that help you preserve those decisions that your team makes so that you guys can work with them?
I think so. And there are other rules around that too. So what if most good designers will use a grid system. So on XD, we use a 12 pixel grid on Mac and a 16 pixel grid on Windows. And that's something that we have to make sure that all the team agrees on and is kind of consensus. And that's actually a really important part when we're talking about text boxes as well, because as you can see, when I paste this, I don't know where it went. Oh, it went in place. When I paste this onto the grid, we have that same alignment issue. Am I aligning this text to the bounding box in the grid, or am I aligning the baseline to the grid? So it all kind of starts to, like, snowball in a lot of ways.
So how many times during your process does that issue of the bounding boxes come up for you?
Most days. I think it's definitely a thing where we definitely need a consensus on it, and sometimes it does come down to, like, what visually looks best in the context of everything, and sometimes it's let's stand by these, like, really rigid rules. So there needs to be a little bit of flexibility when it comes to design systems in most cases, and we find that a lot when we're designing this tool, especially when you're talking about jumping between pixel grids, like 12 and 16 pixel grid.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think what would be a good tool to build that out so we all have this consensus. And where would that live? And where would I want that to live? It could be a way of doing a CC library where you can just populate all your assets, and maybe I could just, like, drop an artboard that has all of my presets already defined for me. I can also imagine if we expanded on the assets library, right? The assets panel, and just added properties to it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
In the assets panel? Is
So,
that where you manage type right now?
yeah, so what if I can add a grid there? Or what if I can add how I want the bounding box to appear? Like, what if those properties can populate in here as well?
Yeah. Are grids something that are important to you? All of you on the live stream, how many of you need to use grids during your process?
I'm imagining it's going to be a lot.
You think it's going to be a lot?
I hope it's a
so
lot.
too.
I'm hoping for it. But no judgment. That's the same question when people ask, like, how many of you name your layers? Like,
Yeah.
I don't.
I use the grid frequently. Yeah.
A dot grid. I wish we had a dot grid.
Depends on what I'm doing. Yeah.
Guidelines. So, like, layout grids maybe. So when we switch to
The responsive grids, pens 50/50.
these kinds. So
Yeah.
guidelines. So these kind of things.
Oh yeah, those.
So I know a lot of people also, like, want the Photoshop, like, ruler grid, where you can kind of, like, drag one out and just put up these guidelines everywhere. That's actually usually a really big feature request, is rulers in XD.
So if there were a grid section in the asset panel, what kind of stuff would we need to put in there for it to be useful? Would it be just the first grid you showed me, or?
Well, we'd have to find a way to. Actually, I'm going to screenshot this and we can start to design out a couple concepts.
Great idea.
Let's see. So, I guess one thing we would want to do is we want to set up a section called like guidelines, right? Yeah. And we're going to use SFUI because that's what we use, and then we're going to make this 11 pixels. Cool. So we're going to set up this new section called
guild lines.
Guild lines.
Perfect.
Is that how you spell?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. So maybe the section is where there are.
Someone sent Talon a ruler.
Wait, what's that?
Someone said I sent Talon an actual ruler in the mail.
That's awesome.
Amazing. All right. Well, let's keep that in mind as we're designing our guidelines section.
I like that.
Yeah.
I also like that they know how to send Talon rulers, like where to send it.
Well, our office address is on Google.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Okay, so like, what kind of things would you want in the guidelines? We were just talking about like text properties, or I guess it would be more like measurement properties, right? How would you phrase that?
You called it something about a bounding?
Yeah,
something?
bounding box behavior.
Yeah.
Is that how you spell behavior?
That's how British people spell
Sweet.
behavior.
I actually spell words like randomly in British, like color. I spell with a U for some reason.
Yeah.
I'm going to stick with it.
Go for it.
I'm going to roll with it.
Can be your style choice.
Yeah.
I like it.
It's my brand.
Yeah.
I'm not British, but...
Anglophile.
Let's actually make this like a little bit tinier. Let's go 9. And then let's actually figure out like there maybe needs to be a property. Like let's go, for us it's 12 pixels, right?
Yeah.
So let's figure out how that might live. And then do a little separator, just for now, get these rough ideas out. Okay. Then what was the other one we talked about?
Grids.
Oh,
There were the vertical ones and then also the square ones.
this is actually where the 12 pixel comes in.
Okay.
This one would be more like, I'm gonna go BL for baseline for now, and that'll be the standard for that. So in this world, it's actually kind of cool because I can say, I can do something like this. Let's prototype this real quick. We're gonna run out of time really quick.
I think that people are going to be really sad if you don't put rulers as one of your guidelines. Can you just put them there? We can always get rid of them later if we need to.
All right. Rulers. What would be the property for rulers?
Yeah, what would be the property for rulers?
If we get that, I'll come back to it.
Okay, I'll watch the screen.
All right. So what I'm gonna do right now is actually set up like a random prototype where we have this awesome bounding box, which is gonna be XD blue for selection. Oops, that's my fill, not my thing. Okay. Okay, then I'm gonna have this guy follow me. So we're gonna pretend like this is just a high level concept, right? So
Yeah.
I'm saying this is a button. This is the thing I have selected on canvas.
Okay.
And then I'm going to actually shrink this down to fit the text perfectly.
Okay.
And all I'm doing right now is creating this like little sort of like widget to kind of describe the behavior I'm looking for. So this is really useful if I'm sending this to a product manager or an engineer saying, hey, this is what this button's trying to do. So when I can go into prototype mode in XD and actually link it to this artboard, and then you can kind of see right away, just in 2 quick screens, of course it's pretty tiny, but I can click this and then you can see the text automatically kind of shrink. So it actually condenses around it. And this communicates it in really quick and easy terms. It's hard to kind of misinterpret that. I might go into here and actually turn this to none.
I like Raphael. He's asking for a user research stream.
I'd subscribe. I'd watch that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how we would maybe quickly prototype that.
Yeah. That looks great.
And maybe next steps would be to kind of take this and throw it into an actual XD thing, I guess, and then make it a little bit more in context, come to life,
Yeah.
style.
And then you and I would work together, and we would probably interview people to talk about, when do they use the different kinds of grids, and how do they need to access them. And then we'd probably set up that, where we'd use that information to figure out where in their process they were when they needed this.
Totally.
And set up some scenarios to evaluate with users that included this feature.
And I know we're not doing justice to the research in the 30-minute stream that we have. We're trying to do it impromptu with you guys involved, like me trying to speak in real time as we kind of think through these problems. But this is actually not that far off from like how we might set up like a document where it's just like, let's walk through like what would they do, when would they do it, how would they do it.
That's right.
And there'd be a lot of back and forth, and Lindsey would challenge me on a lot of things, and I wouldn't have a good answer for it, and then I'd have to go back to my desk and be really sad and confused and try to figure things out.
I think the important thing, though, is like just instead of just testing that one screen with the one panel, you know, and showing it to people and saying, hey, do you like this, or does this look the way you expect? We'd have to do the work of thinking about like where would they be in their process and setting up that whole experience of using the grids from the panel for them before we tested it with them. And that doesn't need to be super time intensive, but it does take the time to think through from the user's perspective, you know, why they want rulers, why they want these different kinds of grids, and who they're for. And do they need to be together? I don't know. Do they go on top of each other, or are you using a different grid at each time? So understanding what capabilities users would need from guidelines in XD would be really important as we would move forward with this feature.
And I think you would probably be sitting down with most of them and saying, like, can you show me? Like where, like what you're using these for, when you would need this, or have you used it in the past, and how do you use them then?
Exactly. How do you solve this problem today? And what's difficult about that, and what's great about that?
And I was trying to kind of replicate that with saying, like, this is a real world thing that I'm going through right now.
I think you did a great job.
Yesterday.
Yesterday.
I was going through this, and so
now,
trying
if
to bring
anything,
those.
I felt bad because I feel like I know you so well. I asked you a couple leading questions that I would really try never to ask in an actual thing. Like, oh, that solves the problem for you, doesn't it? Like, that's really not how I try and ask people questions.
Totally. It's hard to do impromptu, but I think we did a good job. We did justice to it. But yeah, like these are the things that we kind of try to do, like bring up these real world problems, put them in context, and then reach out to everyone and kind of get an idea of like what you're looking for and what you're doing with it. Has there been any other questions about?
No, this discussion, I mean, for me, for them. Yeah, the discussion that's coming up about guidelines and rules and why people want them is really interesting.
Alex is explaining why he wants guidelines, and it's because he's used to them in Photoshop.
That's right.
Which is a huge kind of theme we hear a lot of times, is people are used to it in another app or Photoshop specifically, and they're looking for it when they make that transition to XD. So then it's really helpful, like information as we start to build this.
And it feels to me from these conversations that people are having and from talking to you that that rulers and grids are maybe a little bit different in a way that we might want to learn more about as we were going forward. Great.
I think one thing we might actually question that on is we might not have rulers, but we do have like if you hold down Alt, you can get measurements from anything. So I can like click on this object and see this is 42 pixels. You might not be able to see this on the screen, but we have those things like contextually. So maybe once you know about that, maybe rulers aren't something that you need, or maybe they still are something you need because you want to drag the guides out. So it's really helpful to kind of figure out why.
And is it enough having it conceptually, or do you need to know it all the time? I think those are, you know, as we move forward with grids in the asset panel, those would all be questions we would want to answer.
Definitely.
But
yeah, we'll ship this because I think we did enough research.
Measurement is huge
minutes.
in design, says Anel, and I think that's something that you probably know.
Well, that's why grids are so important. Use grids. Use grids. But no, that was fun.
Thank you guys. Thank you guys all for your questions and for having this conversation with us. It was fun for me.
Totally, me too. I wish we had an hour to keep going.
Just
kind of jamming on this. This is fun. Maybe next time. Maybe we'll have a part 2 of this and kind of come back with a full story and research plan. But that was a quick half hour. That was a really quick half hour. We're at 29 minutes. And
29 minutes.
That, I think, is a wrap for us.
Yeah.
Thank you all for joining. This has been great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsey, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Always fun to be a guest on your show.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Take care, everyone.